Hello and welcome to this new video discussion of the Memory and Future Club of the Association of Former UNESCO staff members. Today in focus, UNESCO will be celebrating this year the 50th anniversary of the World Heritage Convention, which was adopted in Paris by the General Conference in November 1972. Half a century later, with 194 state parties, it is considered as one of UNESCO's greatest achievements and one of its most concrete, visible, and useful programs. On this occasion, the Memory and Future Club is proud to welcome Lazare Eloundou, who became head of UNESCO's World Heritage Center last December, succeeding to Mechtild Rössler, international heritage expert and former director of the center from 2015 to 2021. This dialogue will be moderated by Christina, former Director General of National Historic Sites at Parks Canada and Professor Emeritus of the Canada Research Chair on Built Heritage, Université de Montréal. She was elected chair of the World Heritage Committee in 1990 and 2008. Lazare and Mechtild are both here in Paris, together at UNESCO, and Christina is joining us from Canada. Over to you, Christina.
Thank you, Neda, and welcome, Mechtild and Lazare. It's really an honor to speak with both of you as the former director and current director of the World Heritage Center, and especially in this year, as you say, Neda, it's the 50th anniversary of the World Heritage Convention, so it's really an important benchmark. So let's get started. The first question is about the World Heritage List. Now, the World Heritage List is the most visible part, I would say, of the World Heritage Convention. And there are now 1,154 inscribed properties on the list and almost twice as many on the tentative lists of states parties. So, Mechtild, are these numbers manageable for UNESCO?
I don't think these are manageable because in the beginning we thought the list would maybe stop at 500 of the most exceptional sites, but the list was growing over time. On the other hand, one has to say the cultural and biological diversity is very rich on this planet, and there needs to be an inclusion of new sites in the future, and you cannot just stop the list. What is no longer manageable is for the World Heritage Committee to deal with all the state of conservation reports, because the core of the convention is not the list itself, but to preserve the sites for the future. And with growing problems, I think we see that this is no longer manageable for the staff at UNESCO, for the World Heritage Committee, but also for the nation states, which have the responsibility to protect their sites.
So Lazare, from your point of view, now that you're in the seat of director, is it time to reconsider somehow controlling the list? And if so, how would you do that?
I think the management of the World Heritage List, which has been a success, it's also now becoming a challenge, as Mechtild has rightly pointed out. So it means that, of course, it's probably manageable in terms of archiving a list. But in terms of managing, the issues that are facing the protection, conservation, and promotion of the World Heritage sites, and the role that these World Heritage sites play for helping to contribute to resolving some of the most important issues that our world is facing. I think it's time to look at it, and one of the things will be to open the discussion on these challenges and to see with all the state parties if really this list can continue like that, just like inscribing sites, because the risk is that instead of being a World Heritage List, it's going to be an inventory of a number of sites around the world, and I don't think this is good for the credibility. I think it's important now to sit down with all the state parties, because all of them have ratified the conventions of today. I mean, maybe one is missing, but they can sit all together now and look at this and to really take the courageous decisions that are needed to ensure that the list is still credible in future.
So that leads me to the next issue that I wanted to raise, actually, and that is about the fact that from the beginning, a lot of countries expressed disappointment that the World Heritage List was not representing all parts of the world, that there were many European sites, etc. And that, of course, led to the global strategy of 1994, which aimed to have a credible, balanced, and representative World Heritage List. So that's another part of this same discussion, of opening a discussion. So Lazare, back to you. Do you think there are regions that are still poorly represented?
I think when we look at the list, yes. I mean, I say it quite openly. There are regions that are not sufficiently represented in the World Heritage List. Africa is one of them. I think the Arab states also. And if I can say, even the six countries are not sufficiently represented in the list. In 1994, you know, this very important decision that was taken to launch this global strategy was not only to have a list which is balanced and equitable, but also a list which is representative of all the regions. Let us remember that one of the main purposes of this convention, you know, it was also to promote in general the cultural diversity, meaning that it's an opportunity for all countries who have sites with outstanding universal value to come in the list. And we know that many these regions that we're talking about probably have not had the opportunity or the capacity, technical capacity, financial capacity to propose some of the sites or to identify them. And this is, of course, something which, now that we are celebrating the 50th anniversary, needs to be tackled for the future.
Mechtild, do you have any thoughts on that vis-a-vis natural heritage sites?
I think for natural heritage sites, there were studies done in the very early times, which are the most outstanding places on Earth. And even that over time, we saw with a global strategy for natural heritage since 1996, an evolution to look at different types of sites, similarly to the cultural sites where we have now cultural landscape, modern heritage, industrial heritage, which was very poorly represented before. And this we have also for the natural sites. So over time, there was more diversity there, but we shouldn't forget that we also have new discoveries in terms of biological diversity, if you think of the study which was done on the high seas, for example.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so and earlier on you made the point that it's not really the list that is at the heart of the convention, it's conservation. And that's very clear from the convention itself, that the key goal is to protect and conserve the planet's most important places. So to you, Mechtild, do you think that the convention has been successful in protecting and conserving World Heritage sites?
Actually, we had quite a lot of success stories. If you think back at the origins of the convention, the safeguarding of the Nubian temples from the waters of the Aswan Dam, which were then subsequently inscribed on the World Heritage List, there were many campaigns to save sites. I think there were success stories, but overall, what is a deep regret for me is that the World Heritage Fund and the resources to safeguard the sites have not followed the enormous progress of the number of sites on the World Heritage List. So there is less funding available for conservation than we had thought in the beginning. I don't know if Lazare agrees, but that is a big problem.
In fact, I was going to come on to ask Lazare whether, because the other part of the purpose of the convention was the mobilization of international cooperation, and whether or not you consider that the international community has shown its commitment to the collective protection of threatened World Heritage sites. I mean, one part of that is the World Heritage Fund, but there are many other dimensions to that question. Lazare?
No, if we we speak about the mobilization of international cooperation by mobilizing funds. Now, one thing which is quite important with the World Heritage Convention is that it's World Heritage Funds. You know, it's not, let's say, the countries that have ratified the conventions, you know, are not providing funds only on voluntary basis. You know, it's they have to do it, and that I think this is important. And that's also one of the reasons why we have been able in the past, I think when even when Mechtild was the director of the World Heritage Center, to continue providing international assistance to the countries that were requesting for support. And this has helped, you know, to improve the situation of the site. But of course, it has not been enough, but it has been doing it compared to other cultural conventions. I think this is one of the something which is quite special and important for the World Heritage Convention. But it's not enough because the list has grown. And now, since many countries have ratified the convention and that the needs will be growing and growing, this is where we're going to have a problem, because we'll have less to give for all the sites in future. And this is the challenge. And this is where we now need to think about new avenues, how to create new cooperation or to try to see if maybe the private sectors or voluntary contribution can come in even more and more, because the challenges are growing and the demands is also growing in future. But I will say that although we have been able to support some of the sites, particularly from you know, least developed countries, I think in future we will need more funding, not only to support them, but also to support the World Heritage Center as the main secretariat who is coordinating this work.
Do you think that the Category 2 centers have helped in that regard? They have taken a lot of time to create, and different countries have stepped forward to make Category 2 centers in different parts of the world on issues related to World Heritage. Have they been able to support the way they had hoped?
It depends on the mandate of the Category 2 centers that have been established. Some Category 2 centers have been only established to provide training. Other Category 2 centers, like the African World Heritage Fund for Africa, have been established to become a complementary fund to the World Heritage Fund. And I think for Africa, they have been able to provide this, and we have gradually see, you know, the change. And it means that when we have the opportunity of this fund, it's important to support them, because we know that they are contributing to the work of the World Heritage Center, and they are supporting the implementation of the World Heritage Convention.
That I also see mostly the Category 2 centers have contributed through capacity building and training, as Lazare pointed out as well. But I think it would be great to see a better role for the Category 2 centers also to obtain funding for the different regions and to assist site managers in the daily needs they have. And I think we could see a bigger role for the Category 2 centers, especially if there's only one per region. Then we have also highly specialized Category 2 centers like HIST in China for remote sensing and satellite image analysis, or we have also unfortunately Category 2 centers which never took off their mandate on rock art in Spain or in Indonesia. And that's regretfully, I have to say, because we had hoped to have more support from Category 2 centers.
So shifting gears, World Heritage activity, I think it's fair to say, was originally conceived as the business of experts in geography, history, biology, architecture, etc. And at the same time, it is an international treaty in the context of UNESCO, and therefore many diplomats are involved. So at this point, there has been a clear shift towards involvement of, particularly at World Heritage sessions, involvement of diplomats, and the specialists are less heard. Mechtild, I'll put this one to you. How do you assess the balance between the professional and the political, if you want, representation at the committee sessions, and how has it impacted the implementation of the convention?
I think we have seen the evolution over time. And I remember the World Heritage Committee session in '92, there were mostly experts. There were always diplomats in the room because the states parties are represented with their ambassadors to UNESCO. But the shift was over time more that the floor was taken by the diplomats. Before, we had really in-depth discussions in the committee room itself. And now we have mostly statements read. And that is not the original idea of the convention. One has to say very clearly, because the World Heritage was the forum where key issues of heritage protection worldwide were discussed in one forum once per year. And regretfully, this is no longer the place where these discussions are taking place.
Yes, I could confirm that. My first meeting was in 1987, and certainly the discussion, we had an enormous discussion on industrial heritage sites, as an example. And it was really very interesting to see different perspectives from around the world. It was very spontaneous. Well, when the convention was created, it was created at a time of great threats to historic places and to parks and so on, particularly because of development and, of course, after the war, Second World War. But my take is that there are even more threats to World Heritage sites today, and that than when the convention was created 50 years ago. So my question to each of you, starting with Lazare, is what do you consider to be the greatest threats to World Heritage today? And since some of them seem to be huge, like climate change, what can UNESCO do about them?
Yes, let me start. Okay, if I can give the greatest threat, of course, there are lots of them. And okay, you have the threats, to the environment globally. And but not only, you have the threats due to the need for infrastructure projects, development issues, which are also very important because World Heritage sites are becoming more and more attractive, even more than before. People see opportunities, and and you also have one important threat, which is the growing conflict and armed conflicts around the world. So if I can start by the global issue of climate change. UNESCO has started discussing this issue, and Mechtild has been one of the leading expert from UNESCO to lead this issue together with many others, including yourself, to start reflecting on how this global issue is affecting cultural and natural sites, not only natural sites. And I think what state parties are expecting for the moment, it's a policy. And up to date, we do not have a policy which has been adopted and accepted by everyone on how we can try to fight, or reduce the impact of climate change to natural and cultural sites. And the moment we are going to have this policy, and I think we'll start discussing how to implement the policy and what will be the relation with the understanding the threat to the outstanding universal value, on how to support activities or to undertake conservation activities or for other decisions to be taken. We need to guide state parties on how to deal with issues. And I think this is, I would say, one of the most urgent priority today for the World Heritage to do with the state parties, the World Heritage Committee, to have this policy adopted at this stage. And this is an opportunity to do it.
Does that involve other parts of UNESCO in helping to develop actions once that policy is established?
I continued after Mechtild left, is of course to coordinate the working groups that are discussing the issue, and we hope to finalize this at the next General Assembly, which will take place next year in November 2023, which means that the policy that is going to be presented will also have to take into consideration the general discussion that is taking place in the world on climate change, including all the discussion of the Paris Agreement and many other issues. But not only that, is that we also have to involve, I think, in this, let's say, process of preparing this policy, other partners. We have all our partners in the, who are also protecting not the biodiversity and many others who are very important to involve, to include. We have all the experts who are dealing with the situation. We have the communities also who have experience. I think we will have to get this experience from everyone to finalize this policy, including also the governments.
So, Mechtild, we've explored quite a bit on the climate change. What do you see as the major threats today to World Heritage?
I agree that the climate crisis is one of the key threats, but also the biodiversity crisis, which we are facing. If you look back at the types of threats, when the discussions took place in Stockholm in 1972, it was actually air pollution, which is quite interesting, which affected also the built heritage. And nowadays we look at plastic pollution, for example. But there were many, many threats which were discussed at the beginning of the convention, like over-tourism. We didn't call it over-tourism in the 1980s, but the committee discussed tourism as one of the threats to World Heritage Sites. And another one, which is very important over time, if you look at the reports to the committee, is ill-advised development, whether it's infrastructure, mining, oil and gas exploration, etc. So this was increasing over time and led even to delisting in the case of the first site delisted, which was Oman.
What is in the toolkit for UNESCO to deal with some of those issues like over-tourism or inappropriate development?
We have developed over time the tourism program, sustainable tourism program, which was adopted by the committee in 2012. And that tourism program developed really, for example, visitor use plans, management plans to assist site managers specifically with tourism to diversify tourism, etc., but also to involve the tourism industry. We cannot just preach from UNESCO. This is not possible. You have to work with the actors on the ground. And I think they have some successful projects, but given the global tourism industry, and which is taking off after the pandemic again, I think we need to do much more in this regard.
Now, on another front, in the last decade, the World Heritage Committee has shown an increased interest in sustainable development. And that really, it's been incremental over time. It was first applied to cultural landscapes, and then it became more broadly applied in a policy. And indeed, UNESCO was successful in having those ideas become part of the UN Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development Goals. Has that made a difference for World Heritage, Lazare?
Well, this is an interesting question. And if you take it from the perspective of what I call the beneficiaries. I mean, those who are expecting a lot, from, I will say, the use or the conservation of World Heritage sites. They have not yet seen I'll say, the positive benefit of it. But I think in terms of managing the site today, it had brought additional information for not only UNESCO and the state parties or the World Heritage Committee to maybe pay more attention on what is expected beyond the issue of just conservation of the site. That is exactly what this also brings to the communities. For instance, what it brings to development, and so that it's really sustainable. But we still have to continue really working on towards achieving really what the noble idea of sustainable development before. But when you listen to communities, when you listen to some experts, they are still expecting more. They haven't really seen the difference. But I think, having said that, I'll say it was absolutely necessary to really start thinking and discussing this issue of sustainable development, because I don't think we can go away from it.
So, Mechtild, what are the impediments to operationalizing sustainable development at the site level?
It's a very interesting question because, sustainability is enshrined in the convention itself. In 1992, for the 20th anniversary of the convention, we worked actually with Edith Brown-Weiss, who wrote the book In Fairness to Future Generations on the World Heritage Convention. So it's within the World Heritage sites where you have actually work on sustainability. And I think many site managers are much more aware now with Agenda 2030, states have to report on it, etc. But to have good examples on how, for example, to green World Heritage sites, now with the climate crisis, how to make green cities and to reduce the temperature. So it has so many dimensions of sustainability where we have to give better examples and share better examples with the site managers and with the whole World Heritage community.
So that really argues for breaking down the silo of World Heritage and reaching out into the broader issues and broader discussions that are going on. And one of the questions I had for you is related to that, and it's there was a new phase that began really with the destruction of the Bamyan Buddhas in 2001. And more recently at the tombs of Timbuktu that I know Lazare knows a lot about, and the ancient remains at Palmyra and Aleppo and so on. So UNESCO, I think, was probably the first time that I recall that UNESCO actually took the initiative to bring these atrocities to the attention of the United Nations General Assembly and to the International Court of Justice. So Mechtild, I have a question for you and then one for Lazare, but my question to you is, how successful were those actions that UNESCO took?
I think successful to a certain degree, because the awareness when the Bamyan Buddhas were destroyed was just a global, and UNESCO did the declaration on intentional destruction in 2003 as a follow-up to the destruction of the Bamyan Buddhas. And then subsequently, Lazare worked mainly on the resolutions at the UN level, which included also illicit trafficking and a number of other topics with the 54 Convention and the 1970 Convention. Now, in terms of success, I think the Mali case is a great example, because you cannot just raise awareness about the destructions. What are you doing then on the ground? And I think that one I think Lazare, we had at the time different roles. I was here at headquarters and Lazare was in Mali, and we were dealing with the court case actually from the two ends, and I was there to collect the documentation to be submitted with our legal advisor to the court, and Lazare was actually dealing with the rebuilding, which in my view was a real success story.
The Mali operation, of course, was brought to the Security Council, and one of the reasons why the UNESCO really made everything to bring this to the Security Council was first because UNESCO understood very quickly that there was now a new tactic of war where some groups will use the fact that they are destroying cultural heritage to control some of the communities by depriving them from their cultural identities, their cultural references, and depriving them from what constitute the main part of their social fabric, if I can say, because then they will lose any reference, and it will be easy for those extremist groups to use them as human bombs. And so it was a security imperative. And that's the reason why it was important for UNESCO to alert the international community and bring them. And I think we saw it in Timbuktu, because the reason why the mausoleums in Timbuktu were destroyed by the extremist groups was exactly for this reason. And it was important because the religious buildings that were, these mausoleums were religious buildings also for them, and cultural building became really a big problem for the security for the region and everything. And it was important that the Security Council, send an alarm and, at least act through some of the decisions that were taken there, and also that UNESCO cooperates with the International Criminal Court, and to bring, some of the perpetrators of this destruction to justice.
So with those looking ahead in your role as director, the fact that you have, or UNESCO has successfully brought these resolutions and brought and achieved convictions and so on, and the concept of cultural heritage as a crime against humanity and so on, is that going to make your job easier going forward? Has that strengthened the World Heritage Convention?
Is it really going to make my job easy today? Definitely not, because it will add on top of everything. Simply because today, when there is a destruction anywhere in the world, communities, governments are looking at UNESCO. And they expect UNESCO to do something. And this is what we see, for example, today with the current situation of the war in Ukraine, where cultural heritage is being destroyed. And of course, UNESCO has to act, because UNESCO is expected to protect, cultural heritage, of all its member states and everywhere. And I think one thing that has been positive through the experience of Mali is that there's no impunity. I can say that there's no impunity when there is intentional destructions, and that the perpetrators of this kind of act can be taken to justice. And I think this has been a very important shift in the way we are looking at the destruction of cultural heritage and world heritage. And now we have this experience. So I think in terms of our approach and producing some of the tools and strategies, UNESCO has today the experience to act quickly, alert the world, or take some actions or emergency actions to help protect, these sites that are facing destruction in the event of armed conflicts.
So as you say, it actually adds to the complexity of the work you have in front of you. Another subject I wanted to raise was in the convention, the 1972 convention, there was no mention made of civil society. And yet conservation really happens at the local level for the most part. So in addition, over time, there's been an increased demand from civil society organizations and individuals who want to be involved in the work of World Heritage. So Lazare, without opening the convention in order to give a formal role to civil society, how could civil society become more involved in World Heritage?
You know, when I succeeded Mechtild, I went back and started reading again the convention. And I realized that, you know, there's one part on who are the partners. And I think when you look at this part, I mean, you know, partners are not only governments, you know, partners are all the stakeholders that they have not only an interest in using the site, but also in protecting it. And of course, today, it is definitely important to involve civil society. And maybe, you know, when the convention, and Mechtild can talk about it and yourself, when the convention started to be implemented, this issue was not probably raised as it is today. Now, there are sometimes we see issues of human rights. And that's the reason why even the World Heritage Committee, in trying to examine some of the nomination files, you know, is also trying to address this issue. But I consider that this is not enough. And I think the World Heritage, I mean, we have to do more because the human rights issues, the cultural rights issues are absolutely important. We were talking about, you know, the Agenda 2030 and sustainable development. I mean, all these issues are very important. Protecting indigenous people, protecting local communities, and protecting their rights to use the sites. It's very important. And we are seeing more and more complaints. And I think it's important to give more role, and that's my belief, to give more role to the civil society in during the World Heritage Committee in order to listen to them, to listen to the issues that they would like to raise.
I think Mechtild will recall that when we interviewed the Director General of the time, Mr. Matsura, he made exactly those points in his interview for the World Heritage Oral Archives. It was he felt that was a real weakness of the convention, so that's worth reviewing. Okay, I'm coming near the end. I have two more things I want to raise. One is about the most important achievements in this past 50 years. What are the most important achievements that have been made in implementing the convention? And what needs to change? And so if you had a crystal ball, once you've reviewed what has been achieved, what do you think is going to happen in the future for World Heritage? So Mechtild, we'll start with you.
That's not an easy question, but I always think that this convention has an incredible system established over 50 years in terms of monitoring heritage sites globally. We have practically a system where you have 1,154 sites, which gives monitoring data to the World Heritage Center. We have indicators on threats. We have another system, which is the periodic reporting, which is every 6 years to report on the state of conservation of sites and on the implementation of the convention. So the system is there, but the threats are also evolving, as we just discussed. And that will be the biggest challenge for the future, to address new and emerging threats which we were not aware of in the same way as we are today. And I think that will be the biggest problem for the next 50 years to come.
My small experience and what I've seen, I think Mechtild has been observing the World Heritage System for many years. What I can say about the success, first of all, is that the World Heritage Convention and system is universal now. And I think this is an important success. Everywhere you go, and when you hear World Heritage, it speaks to you. And I think, and that's also the reason why when people refer to UNESCO, the first thing that comes to their mind is the beautiful sites that are recognized in the world. And this is something which is important. And I think it was made possible because it's one of the international instrument which has the mechanisms that works perfectly. And the second important achievement I think of is that the World Heritage are also part of development strategies of many countries. When they think about World Heritage, then think about inscribing World Heritage, you know, there is also some of the investment and many things that people now start slowly putting in place because they have World Heritage, because it's going to attract the international travelers, because it's going to promote their culture. And so this is something which you don't see with, not enough with other cultural conventions, but you see it with World Heritage. And if you ask me what's going to happen in future, my easy answer that I don't know. But what I start seeing is the digital transformation, the digital era. I think we are now moving slowly to this. People are using smartphones, are sending pictures. They would like to visit World Heritage sites, through their computers. They would like to know more. They would like to better understand. And I think we will slowly have to also deal with this issue of, the digital era in future. And the other thing which we were mentioning is all the other connection to World Heritage sites that are important. That is how to use World Heritage sites to deal with some of the global challenges of the world. Climate change being one of them. We saw the pandemic, which is also, how we also deal with this kind of issue in future. And the whole issue of human rights, which will come more and more because of all issues that are being dealt, around World Heritage sites.
Thank you. And I have a last question, which is really a personal reflection from each of you. And that is, starting with you, Mechtild, you've had a wonderful career at the World Heritage Center and memorable role as director. And how, in looking back on that, what was your greatest challenge as a director of the World Heritage Center?
Oh dear, I think I had many challenges. One of them was really the resources to keep the staff here and resources for the sites in need. That was, I think, a huge challenge. And the other one was to prioritize the needs, because the problem is that there are so many sites under threat, and you feel like the fireman of this earth, and you have to go there and to do this. And so this was, I think, one of the biggest challenges, to give what is needed to the sites most in need. And I hope we can deal with that in the future. Lazare, I hope.
So I shift to you, Lazare. Yeah, you've been in the job for a short period of time, and congratulations publicly. And what do you see as your challenges or your major challenge coming up?
I think Mechtild probably didn't speak about one thing which has also been one of her challenges, which I think is going to be mine, is how to deal with the issue of politicization. And I think because I think since diplomats, politicians, governments, and other interests are now coming more and more, we have to deal with it. We have to deal with geopolitics. We can see today with the whole issue of the war in Ukraine and what it creates, because they are still discussing where and how to organize the next World Heritage Committee, which has nothing to do with the technical work and the responsibility of the center, but we have to deal with it. And we might see this more and more as a big challenges. And for me, I started my tenure, I think six weeks after I started working. I had to face the consequence of the war in Ukraine and all the other consequences, and I'm still dealing with it. So it shows me already some of the issues in future. One other thing which is going to be for us a big challenge is, of course, the resources, because this is not going to. I think it's going to be a bigger challenge again, because you have to deal with things every day. And at the World Heritage Center, we need to continue to rely on the professionals who are working here. And the staff of the World Heritage Center, it's absolutely important. There are great professionals here, and without them, it's very, very difficult. And I will even say it will be impossible to meet all the challenges. Then the last one is that we are dealing today with more urgent demands. Every day there is something new. There's something to deal with. There is a solution to bring, to find, because we have 194 state parties, so they are asking and they expect the World Heritage Center to provide them with all the information to analyze their project, to receive the answers. They want to continue with the nominations, so they want to make sure that they are in the right side. And we have to provide all this information. We have to coordinate this. And it means that the center will also have to adapt to this new environment with this complexity.
Well, those points really speak to where we started, and that is the manageability of the system. And also the question of digitalization and how everything is so much faster. And also the expansion of what is considered within the purview of World Heritage, because in the beginning it was really like architecture and history and wilderness and parks and things and biodiversity. But now it's a vast global panorama of issues that you have to deal with. So I wish you well, Lazare, as we move forward. And I want to thank both of you for sharing your own thinking about where the World Heritage Convention is at 50. Thank you both.
Thank you very much.
And I'll turn it back to you, Neda.
Yes, on this challenging concluding note, I would like to thank Lazare Eloundou and Mechtild Rössler for this fascinating discussion, and Christina Cameron for moderating it. Before leaving, I also call the viewers' attention to an important initiative launched in 2006 for UNESCO's 60th anniversary by the Canada Research Chair on Built Heritage at the Université of Montréal under the leadership of Christina Cameron. It captures the memories of pioneers of World Heritage, some of whom are no longer with us, as well as important moments in the history of the convention. These oral archives of the World Heritage Convention are now accessible on UNESCO's website at the page you see on the screen. Do visit this page. It contains a wealth of information. Based on these recollections, a book entitled Many Voices, One Vision, The Early Years of the World Heritage Convention was published by Hachette Routledge in 2013. A French version is also available under the title La Convention du Patrimoine Mondial, La Vision des Pionniers at Les Presses de l'Université de Montréal. And that's all for today for the Memory and Future Club. Thank you for your attention, and we hope to find you soon again online.